Hi, I'm FIDE Master Levi Cherbolenko, and in this series I analyze the openings of people rated anywhere between 8,000 and 2,000. The following is a chess.com game played between 1384 versus 1405. Alright, let's start. Alright, so d4, knight f6, developing the knight. Okay, knight c3. This is not the main move, it's like a sideline. Usually there's this rule of thumb, you don't put the knight in front of a c-pawn, especially like the queenside knight, right? We put the knight behind the pawn. So usually they go pawn to c4 and then knight c3 behind, because this way we have more control of the center. Like when you play knight c3 and let's say black goes d5, right? Now there's no real pressure against the d5 pawn because it's like easily defendable. Whereas if you go c4 and then knight c3, right? Then you have a knight and a pawn that puts pressure on d5. So that's the rule of thumb. Plus the pawn opens up the queen. So that's how we usually go. Usually it's not a great idea to put the knight in front of a pawn, you know. Okay, it's not the worst move. So it still develops the knight, but it's not the optimal move. All right. Okay, d5. So that's a good move. So the point of knight c3 might be that white maybe he doesn't want to play c4, but he want to go e4. So for example, if black allows it, if black goes, let's say, d6, white could have just played the e4 after d6, right? And now this way we have knight d4 c4, but d4 e4 pawn center, which is also fine, right? So this might justify knight c3, but if black plays d5, then I mean knight c3 is not so great, right? Because now we played knight c3, but we cannot play e4, so it is not justified. Okay, so d5, good move, I like it, to prevent e4. You really don't want to allow e4 for white to play. Okay, bishop f4 makes sense, good move, developing the bishop, and also maybe threatening knight b5, threatening the c7 pawn. e6, okay, now this I don't like, so black clearly does not apply prophylactic thinking. Obviously, white's idea is to go knight b5. Now you should never allow knight b5 in this kind of positions, it's not a good idea. First, let's see what black played, couple moves, and then we'll go back, alright, let's see. e6, yeah, knight b5, knight a6, yeah, this is not at all good, And I mean, what else? If not knight a6, bishop d6 he'd have to play, but then white can just take with the knight on d6, cd, and now black has one, double pawns, and two, white has the power of two bishops, especially this bishop, which has no counterpart, okay? So already this is advantage for white. Next white could just play like e3, bishop d3, knight f3, castle. I have an advantage due to the power of two bishops. Okay, so bishop d6 also not great, but knight a6 also not much better. You should not allow this in the first place. Let's see what black should have done. I mean, there is like, let's say, two ways you can stop it, right? Knight b5, either a6 or c6, right? a6 or c6, both stopping knight b5. I would recommend c6 because you want to think long term. What do you think is white's next plan? Like, if you look at this is not the most typical structure, right? Not the most typical structure. So what do you think is white's plan? Like, they quickly developed the knight, right? Not playing c4. That's the plus of knight c3. They did not, play c4 so that they can quickly develop the knight. They quickly developed the bishop. Why do you think is that? What do you think is their goal if they quickly develop the queenside pieces? Most likely, next white wants to play queen d2 and then castle long. That's the whole point. White plays this bit unusual chess because they want to create an imbalance. Like, they know that black will castle kingside, and so they want to castle queenside to create a more interesting play. So you want to apply prophylactic thinking. You should always think what will be your opponent's next couple of moves in the opening, right? You should think ahead. So if we know that most likely white wants to castle queenside, then I'd recommend c6. Now, why is that? Because we play c6, not only do we prevent knight b5, strengthen the d5 pawn, but we also have two other great ideas. One, c6 will help us with b5, which pawn storm is like the key idea when you have opposite castling. You have to attack the king with pawns and pieces, right? Pawn storm, not just pieces, but also pawns. So not only it prepares b5, b4, but also it opens up our queen. That will go to a5. And then once the knight from c3 is gone, the queen will be putting pressure on the a2 pawn. So this, I think, is the best. And actually, this happens quite a bit. I've had this myself in like many online games on chess.com. This happens quite a bit with system. This is like the Jobava London is called. Yeah, the Jobava London. The typical London, we put the pawn usually on c3, and the knight goes through d2. In the Jobava London, we play like this, okay? So you'd go c6. Let's say we go queen d2. You could just even play immediately b5 if you want, right? Just immediately b5. You immediately discourage him from castling queenside. If he does not castle queenside, then it kills his like main purpose, right? To castle queenside, and then you're fine. Then, yeah, if white does not castle queenside, there's no attack against your king. So then you're fine. But usually they castle queenside. But if they castle, but it's not a good idea to castle right now. But let's say they castle right now, and now you have a choice. You can either play b4 immediately or first queen a5. Let's say b4 immediately. You gain space, you make the knight move. Now see, if they go to like b1, that's such a poor knight. It's a very weak knight, right? And now you could play, if you want, even knight e4, attack the queen. They can take on b4 by the way, because you just go e5. Double attack on the queen and the bishop, right? And so game over. And like f2 is also attacked. So what do they play? Let's say queen e3, I don't know, for example, yeah. Now this pawn is weak. I mean, you could just play queen a5, let's say, you know, and then put pressure here. And if they play a3, that's, I mean, let's say pawn hook, I mean, you could maybe just take, let's say, they can't take with the queen, because when you just take, knight takes, and you take on f2, game over. So you have to take with a knight, but then maybe you can play, I don't know, e6 and attack the knight, maybe even e5 potentially, maybe with tempo, and then, you know, take the knight. Also potentially might be interesting ideas like, let's say, e5, when if they take, you play bishop takes a3, and if queen takes a3, you take, and then you go knight f2, game over. Or if they go ba, you go knight. Although no, it doesn't work, knight c3, because knight c3 there's if you go knight c3, there's bishop c7, check, and then we take the queen, so it doesn't work. But I mean, you could just maybe just castle, and then you have this knight c3 idea. The king is pretty weak, right? So yeah, you could just castle, and then knight c3, also interesting. But you're not obliged to do this. If you want, you can keep it simple. Just go like e6, and next you can take the knight, you know, ideas like this. Yeah, white is much worse here, much worse. So stuff like this, right? So then, but if you go to a4, now you go queen a5. Again, remember, b4 always goes together with queen a5. That's the combination, okay? So knight e4, queen a5, attacking the knight. They cannot move the knight to c5, because then we just take on a2, right? And it's basically over. So we have to play b3. But any pawn move that they make weakens the king, because it weakens squares, the c3, the a3 square, the second rank a little bit, the a2 pawn becomes backward, right? It's just bad. And now black has different ideas here. So this is a typical situation. What ideas? One idea, for example, could be knight e4, attack the queen, and and attack the f2 pawn. Let's say white goes what, queen e1, yeah, guarding f2. Now there's different ideas. You have knight c3, attacking the rook, attacking the knight, forcing basically knight takes c3. So knight takes c3, bc, and now we have this threat, right, with checkmate, you know. So I mean, yeah, this looks pretty good, right? We also can activate our bishop, maybe e6 or e5 in a more active way if we need to. Maybe bishop e4 guard this pawn if you're gonna attack it, you know. We also have ideas like knight a6 and then knight b4. Like if they play, let's say, king b1, there's knight e6, knight b4, attacking the a2 pawn. There's also bishop f5 ideas, by the way, combined with knight e6, knight b4, attacking the c2 pawn. White is just much worse here, especially in a practical game. Because if you play like a real game against a human, most likely they will not find the best defense, especially in a limited time control, alright? So that's one idea. There's also other ideas. There's also this idea of knight d7. Let's say they play some move, let's say e3, and then you can go knight b6. Now the key goal in these kind of positions is to get rid of this knight. Because it's blocking our queen, blocking its access, you know, controlling the c3 square. So that's the key goal, to get rid of this knight, to open up our queen, to expose his king. So there's this typical idea, knight bd7, e3, knight b6. Now again, they cannot play knight c5 because we just take, for example, yeah. So what do? We have to take, and then you can go ab and open up your rook. And again, white is much worse. You know, queen a2 we have, and knight e4 again we have, attacking the queen, attacking f2, knight c3 next, also queen a3 check, also queen a2, simply open up our rook. This is over. It's just over, right? So remember this idea as well, typical idea. Knight d7, knight b6, we take weave upon, open up your rook, or sometimes actually, sometimes maybe you even have this trick, you go queen a3 check. Maybe even here, maybe it might even work, I don't know. King b1 and knight e4, right? Attack the queen, and then if you simply move a queen, you just have knight c3. King a1, queen a2, checkmate. So that also might sometimes work, right? You don't even take the knight. But the easiest, like if that queen a3 idea doesn't work, the easiest you could always just take the knight with a pawn and you're fine. But always look at queen a3, knight e4 true, alright? It's just that maybe white can, I don't know. But actually they can't even sack the queen. Because if you take the rook, you don't even take the queen. You play knight c3 check. And then if king a1 checkmate, and if they take, you take, and then queen b2 checkmate. So, yeah, maybe it does work, yeah. So that's one idea. Another idea would be to play bishop a6. Now, why play bishop a6? Because, again, we want to play bishop b5 and put pressure on the knight. This is another way of getting rid of a knight. Bishop a6, bishop b5. And if they play e3, now we play again, we don't take the bishop, we play this key move, bishop b5, still attacking the knight, and after we take with the c pawn, and again, it's over, right? The knight moves somewhere, let's say knight c5 or something, and you can just take on h2 if you want, or right, or let's say knight b2 again, you can just take here, you know. So just remember these typical ideas, right? Bishop a6, bishop b5, and then you take the pawn, or knight bd7, knight b6, and then you take the pawn, or knight e4, knight c3, and then once we take, you take the pawn, and then have queen a3, or a combination thereof. Okay, all right. So that's one way you could play, or sometimes you could play, if you want, you could play immediately queen a5, and then threatening b4. Now this might be a bit different. What's the difference? The difference is that now you're threatening b4, and one, they cannot even go knight a4 in the first place, and two, after they go, you're threatening queen takes a2, right? You're threatening queen takes a2. So that's like the difference. And like king b1, they cannot even play because you go b4, and the knight's stuck. The knight has no moves, right? And so what, they have to play e3, but I mean that's a pawn hook for b4. So a3 if you go, you could just play, I don't know, maybe just e6, right? Open up this bishop and then play b4. Bishop takes b4. So for example, if you go e3, you just go b4, takes here. Now you have this queen a1 threat. Even if knight b1, you just take the queen. But you're also threatening knight e4, right? Attacking the queen, attacking the knight, and so basically it's over. This is huge advantage for black. Also, white's king is open, the b file is open. It's just so bad for white, okay? So there's two ways you could play, right? Queen a5 or b4 first and then queen a5, right? Yeah, but you see how good it is, right? So this is how you wanna play. Another move would be a6, but I don't like it as much because, again, it does not open our queen. So you don't need a6. So I would say c6, all right? Now, why is this so bad to allow this? Because you don't want to have a knight on a6. It's a very poor knight. Like, it's never getting out of this. Like, it's a very bad knight in the corner, like, and it cannot move. So, for example, white did white? Okay, e3 is fine, yeah. White can just play e3 and then c3, let's say, and then this knight can never move. So either b4 or c5 or back to b8 because c7 is attacked, or if they do move back to b8, I mean, then why did they play knight a6 in the first place? So they lost a tempo, you know. The knight just doesn't move, cannot move through c7. It's just such a poor knight. In these kind of positions, ideally, you want to have like a... You don't have a knight on a6 is the point. You want to have it somewhere central, on d7 or on c6 or something like that. Somewhere central, ideally c6, but not in front of a pawn. Ideally, you know, behind the pawn, right? Or on d7, but never on a6. So this is not good. You should never allow this, okay? e3, c6, yeah, and now look at this knight, yeah. Yeah, see? Yeah, we go back, but then they wasted their tempo. See, they still played c6, this is ironic. They still played c6, which is my idea. But I mean, we wasted the tempo on knight e6, knight b8. So that was unnecessary. Yeah. Okay. Bishop here. Okay. Bishop. Yeah. Bishop d6. Okay. Knight f3. Okay. Takes. Castles. Okay. Knight e5. Okay. I mean, the downside of this is why it's moving the same piece twice. So yeah. Okay, knight b7. Yeah, I guess that's okay. Also, maybe could have played even more actively. But that's fine. But I mean, there's also c5 ideas, you know, because clearly white wanna attack on the king side, right? Because the position is a bit closed. They have a very strong knight in the center, the bishop on d3, so they might wanna go for some attack against our king. So usually the best defense is counterattack in the center. So I'd say c5 would have been interesting. Even if white takes, I mean, we have just like queen a5, right? Preventing b4. And then queen takes c5, and then we at least opened up the game a little bit. You know, queen takes c5 we can go, and then we can play knight c6, challenge this knight. So this is a common idea. Always consider c5. I know that we played c6, but we have to adjust. The situation changed. So it doesn't mean that if you play c6, you never play c5. You have to adjust. So c5, I think, would have been interesting. But here, knight bd7. Let's see. g4. Yeah, I mean, I see white goes for this straight attack. Usually it doesn't work. When you like move the same piece twice, you move a pawn, but the king is still in the center. Usually it's premature. Like with the king in the center, these kind of attacks usually do not work. But there are exceptions. Sometimes they do work. So. But okay, see, now they play c5. You should have played earlier, I think. But okay, c5, g5, knight takes e5, de, knight d7. Yeah, I mean, okay, knight d7. Yeah, no, it has a pretty strong center. Queen h5, g6. Queen f3, queen a5 threatening d4, but there's also c4 ideas. Yeah, I guess queen a5 is not bad actually. King f1, wanna go here. But I mean, this diagonal might be weak. Oops, wait. This diagonal might be weak for white. So maybe black would like potentially put the bishop here and then push d4 somehow. c4 here, knight c5. h4. Wait, knight e4. I mean, what's the point? Yeah, and no, this is just bad. So they played knight e4. Pam pam. White is up a pawn, and now queen d5, and they exchange. And white is simply up a pawn. So this is not the best. Black is just down a pawn. Yeah, at this point, black's just worse. So basically, I mean, probably should have traded the queens like this, losing a pawn, right? Maybe should have played like d4 or something. Maybe like d4 would be more interesting, right? Attacking the knight, I think would have made a lot of sense actually. Or maybe some other move, or maybe I don't know, maybe b5 and then b4, and then put the bishop on b7 and then go for d4. Maybe this is what black should have done, right? b5, b4, bishop b7, d4. And if white goes h5, because this is white's main idea, h5, put the queen on h3 and then take. Well, guess what? It's very easy to parry this. We just go queen to c7. Good prophylactic idea at some point. And when they play hg, we just go fg and open up our queen and guarding the h7 pawn. And then we're fine. So I think something like this black should have played. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.